Welcome everyone. As you're coming into the room, if you would please mute yourselves until you're invited to speak, we'd appreciate that. Okay, everyone's in the room. Who's starting, Linda or Shruti?
Okay. So hey, good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for today's District 18 Town Hall. My name is Shruti Bhatnagar. I am the chair of the District 18 caucus and serve on the Central Committee for the Montgomery County Democratic Party, representing District 18. Thanks to all of you for joining us today. And I want to start with a quick shout out and recognizing our elected officials and party officials as well. So we have Evan Glass, who is our council member at large, District 18 delegation, Senator Walt Stryker, Senator Al Carr, Delegate Emily Shetty, and Delegate Jared Solomon. Thank you all for joining us. And Linda Foley, who is the chair of the Montgomery County Democratic Central Committee. I also want to give a shout out to Joan Kleiman, who's representing U.S. Senator Chris Van Hollen. So Linda, I will pass it on to you for introductory remarks.
Yeah, thank you, Shruti, and thank you everyone for joining tonight. These town halls are really important. I want to congratulate the District 18 delegation and really the entire Montgomery County delegation and the entire General Assembly for the work that you did in this legislative session. I think that there was some incredible legislation that was passed. Clearly, it's impactful. And, given the circumstances under which everyone was working, it's all the more amazing. So thank you for that. And thank you for everyone who has joined this Zoom call. Just to bring you up to date a little bit on the Central Committee and what we're doing in the Democratic Party. Shruti may talk about some of this also during the course of this meeting, but we just had a very successful fundraiser with Senator Barbara Mikulski. We spent an evening with her. And so our finances at the Central Committee are in pretty good shape, especially for an off election year. And so we're beginning to put that money to good use. We are in about a month or so going to commence with a listening tour, which is really going to be canvassing and phone banking of our voters here in Montgomery County and in District 18. Our precinct leaders are being trained on how to do that. And we're going to be asking people, what are the issues that you care about? And we hope to use that information to not only help us connect with the voters, but also to inform the candidates and the incumbents as well as the new candidates who are running for office about what the people in Montgomery County are thinking about and caring about as we go into this election cycle. It's very important in this election cycle that we focus our energies on electing, our local officials and our General Assembly officials, but we also need to really focus on the governor's race, which we need to take back the State House. So our legislature did amazing work, but they also had to spend a lot of time overriding vetoes that Governor Hogan had issued. And so we want to make sure that we take back the State House so that we can continue to move Maryland forward in the future. And also we need to be focused on the U.S. Senate seat currently occupied by Senator Chris Van Hollen. We need to make sure that we keep that seat and that we work hard to make sure that we continue to get the excellent representation that Senator Van Hollen has given us there in the Senate. So we're just beginning this election cycle. We have a long way to go, but thank you everybody for being here, and stay tuned. We will be either knocking on your door or reaching out to you in other ways to get you to participate and help us make the election cycle in 2022 as successful as the one we had in 2020. Thank you very much, and I'll turn it back to Shruti.
Thank you, Linda, and we really appreciate your strong leadership on the Montgomery County Democratic Central Committee. I want to recognize Council Member Andrew Friedson, who just joined us, and also Michael Tardif for MCDCC Communications, and also fortunate to have him on our District 18 team, He will be helping and supporting throughout this process of our session today. So the format that we have is we will start with Senator Walt Stryker, who will share an update on behalf of the D18 from the 2021 General Assembly session. And then we will pass it on to each of our 3 delegates to share updates on the bills that they have moved this session. At the end of it, we will take questions. There were 7 or 8 questions that were submitted to us ahead of time. We will start with those, but in the duration of this session, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. We will ask them after all the presenters have finished presenting information. So with that, Senator Walt Stryker.
Thank you, Shruti, and thank you to Linda and Michael for helping to organize this wonderful town hall. I'm really excited to be here. Let me start by apologizing for my casual dress. I was about to get ready for tonight's town hall. My wife got stuck in a meeting at work, so I had to run and pick up my son at soccer practice. So I apologize. I just got back and didn't have a chance to change. Thank you for understanding. I know many of you know my children. I love your interactions with my kids. I would be remiss if I didn't start tonight talking about an important victory for District 18. As many of you learned today, the Hogan administration has abandoned the expansion of the Beltway. My son Harry is coming in to give me a glass of water. Say hello, Harry. All right, now let me get back to the folks who are here. So the Hogan administration has abandoned the expansion of the Beltway east of Route 270. And that's a big victory for the people of District 18 throughout Bethesda, Chevy Chase, Kensington, and Silver Spring. This was always going to be an environmentally destructive project and particularly disruptive for people who live near that very narrow portion of the Beltway. So it's a big win for our community. Let me now touch on a couple things related to our legislative session. And I know I can't do everything because I want to save something for the questions that you guys have today. But even as we come out of this COVID-19 pandemic, let us not forget the important sacrifices and suffering that many people went through over the last 14 months. And our most important role as a legislature during the legislative session that just concluded was to provide relief to people who need it most. And here's how we did it. So we passed and expanded the nation's largest earned income tax credit, which provides cash directly to working people and their families in Maryland. It's a huge historic moment when we passed that bill. We ensured that our immigrant neighbors in need were eligible for assistance regardless of their legal status. We overhauled our unemployment system. So, and we made sure that we provided direct payments to those who are waiting for their unemployment to be paid out to them. We invested hundreds of millions of dollars in rent relief for tenants who need it. It's so critical. We have so many people still hurting, and many of them are renters, and getting that direct cash into their hands so that they can stay in their homes is critical. We also passed the largest tax relief in Maryland history. And where did that tax relief go to? It went to eliminating taxes on unemployment benefits. So those who were hurt the most by the pandemic weren't doubly taxed. And we reduced taxes on small businesses like restaurants, who were incredibly challenged during the last 14 months. Overall, it was an incredibly productive session. And we did what we came to do, which is provide relief for those who need it most during this once in a generation pandemic. I'm sure we'll touch on many other topics, including the environment and police reform. But for now, I want to hand it over to my team, my delegate team. And first, that's Delegate Alcar.
Thank you, Senator. Good evening, everyone. It's great to be with you. Thank you so much, Shruti, Michael, Linda, and the other organizers. So yeah, as Senator Walt Stryker said, it was really quite an extraordinary session. This was my 13th legislative session, I believe. And every session is different, but this one truly was different. One thing that was different about it was that how hard we worked. That normally there is sort of a slow period during the beginning of the session as things ramp up, and there are briefings and receptions. But this session wasn't like that. We started working on day one, and we did not stop for the entire 90 days, which is why I think we were able to get a tremendous amount done. There are General Assembly leadership. They were able to keep us safe. We were able to operate in a lot of ways virtually, which was unique and different, and let us be productive. So hats off to them. I continued to serve on the Health and Government Operations Committee. I also am the vice chair of the Montgomery County delegation and chair one of its committees. To focus in on the Health and Government Operations Committee, we looked at several things. One related to the pandemic. During the pandemic, there's been a much greater use of telehealth. So we had a bill called the Preserve Telehealth Act, and this is an area that Delegate Shetty has worked on quite a bit. And, of course, telehealth makes a lot of sense, and it's something we should be doing anyway. But the pandemic was really the catalyst to get us doing that, and that we need to continue doing that. Another area of focus in our committee was medical debt. It had become apparent that many low-income Marylanders were being subjected to very aggressive debt collection practices by hospitals. So Delegate Charkoudian had a great bill to reform medical debt collection practices. And then open government, all the Sunshine Law related bills come to the Health Committee as well. So we passed a great bill that expands our Sunshine Law, the Maryland Information Act. And growing up, I remember listening to stories from my family of events in American history that affected us. But these big events, I always related to them as history, as things that happened in the past. For example, the murder of Emmett Till in 1955 had a profound effect on my parents' generation and inspired many people to be involved in the civil rights movement. So I never expected to have such significant events happen in my lifetime. And of course, the murder of George Floyd, I think, was similar in some ways to the murder of Emmett Till in the way that it spurred an awareness of the problem of white supremacy and of the need for police reform. So it's been quite an extraordinary time to serve, and I really appreciate being able to do that. I'm really looking forward to your questions, and I will hand it off at this point to my colleague, Delegate Shetty.
Hi, everybody. It's so good to see you all today. I see so many familiar faces, but I also see a lot of new faces. So it's an honor to get to join you this evening. As my colleagues and friends have shared before me, this was in many ways an incredibly historic session, not just for the way we were forced to operate differently because of COVID, but also because of some of the monumental pieces of legislation that passed, many of which we heard directly from many of you about. We had a very active constituent base this session. I only 3 years into the job, as you know, so I only have 3 years to compare to, but I'd say we probably got more engagement this session by far than even in prior sessions. And our district is always one of the most communicative, which we love. So thank you for all of your advocacy and engagement. Many of you participated virtually in hearings as well before a number of our committees. I serve on the House Judiciary Committee, so I saw many of you before us on a number of different issues that you care about, whether it was ghost guns or police reform or other issues as well. And I'm really grateful for that advocacy because it really helped move the needle on a number of big policies that we really needed to see that level of constituent engagement and support. So thank you for all of your dedication and time. It's not easy to sign up and sit and wait in a Zoom waiting room for 16 hours until it's your time. But you know, I know that myself and many of my colleagues really appreciated having that that time with you and that time that you spent. So thank you. I hope, as Delegate Carr mentioned, some of the reforms that were made in our General Assembly's operating remain even when we return to some semblance of normal. I really missed having you all there in person. I hope that that returns, but I also hope that we have, you know, that added level of transparency was so nice. Like the fact that, you know, you all could watch our subcommittee proceedings and our voting sessions was different than years past. And I hope that we're able to maintain that and figure out a way logistically to continue to offer that level of transparency for the public, because I think that that was really a wonderful change that I hope we're able to maintain. So on my end, you know, I tried to be fairly conservative in terms of like the number of bills that that I introduced this session, because I knew going into it, we all knew that it was going to be a very different year. And so I only introduced 9 bills this year, but it was a very successful year in some ways. Personally, I got 8 of those bills passed through the House and 6 made it through the entire process. So 1 has already been signed into law by the governor. And I believe he's announcing which bills he'll be signing in his next set of bill signings on or around the 18th. So hope to hear some good news at that point. But the bills I worked on really ranged. I worked with a couple of constituents on a number of issues that were facing them. We heard from some constituents who lived in a condominium who were trying to compost by collecting like food scraps in an airtight container. And they happen to subscribe to a compost pickup company that it happens to be based in District 18, Compost Crew. And one of his neighbors was upset at the sight of this airtight container on his balcony. So she reported him to their HOA, which then began to fine their family $10 a day. So he reached out to me and asked for assistance because he said he didn't believe that you know, doing what was right for the environment should cost his family so much extra. And I agree with him. I didn't think that HOAs should penalize apartment owners or condo owners or homeowners in general for the right and the ability to safely and otherwise like engage in what is allowed by like local and county and state law. So we passed a bill that restricts HOAs from doing that. I'm really proud of that. I hope that the governor signs that into law. A couple of others I just want to highlight because a couple of you were really active on some of these. One that I know Senator Wallstreicher has worked on in the past as well, but it removes the publication requirement for name changes. So this is a bill that I've worked on now. This was the 3rd year that I reintroduced it. It had passed the House unanimously last session, but because of COVID and our early adjournment wasn't able to make it through the full the Senate consideration. So this year, we got it through. Both the House and the Senate passed it with very large bipartisan votes. So I'm anticipating that the governor will likely sign that into law. And what that does is it removes the publication requirement for an individual who is seeking to change their name. This is an archaic requirement. It dates back to like pre-social security numbers, and was really a way for creditors to be able to follow people who were in debt. And now with, people publicizing this on the internet, right? Because that's where a lot of these ads go. These advertisements live on in perpetuity. And so it really has a disproportionate harm on the LGBT community and on domestic violence survivors. And so we heard testimony from a number of people. We got a lot of great support from some of you as well. And we were able to get that bill passed. So I'm very delighted to share that as well. Passed a couple of other bills that I'm very proud of, happy to share information if any of you have any questions. But I'd say, as many of you know, one of the biggest pieces of legislation that went through both my committee as well as Senator Wallstreicher's committee is the big police reform bill. And I know we have several of you who have joined, who were very actively engaged in the advocacy around that legislative package. And we're really grateful for your voices because I'm very proud of the bill that we landed on. I think we're, for the first time, really injecting a lot of public transparency and accountability into our policing practices, which is needed. Right before about 24 hours or 48 hours before the marking up of the bill began in subcommittee, we had a reassignment of the Judiciary Committee, and I got put on the Public Safety Subcommittee, which was an honor to really be able to be in the weeds as we were debating these giant reforms on accountability. We repealed the Law Enforcement Officers Bill of Rights. Many of you asked us prior to session where we stood on that, and we were able to do that. We replaced it with a significantly more accountable to the public process, a much more transparent process, and we're really proud of that as well. We also included some other reforms, including like body camera recording. So this was an amendment that I worked with Delegate Moon on that I'm really excited about, which basically some of you may know, Montgomery County's police force uses body cameras, but these cameras already have the technological ability to record for like a period of time prior to the officer actually activating the camera by pushing a button. So so what this bill does is it actually requires the jurisdictions to activate that setting so that a minute prior to the officer actually activating the camera, we're able to capture that additional footage. And we've seen across the state in some other jurisdictions, some instances where that type of footage provides the needed extra context for adjudication over like what actually happened in the determination of something that could have been wrongdoing by an officer. So really happy that we were able to include some transparency there. And then, as many of you may have followed as well, we had some transformational use of force policies that were included as well. And I'm really happy to report that that there's proportionate use of force required. So you're not it actually like penalizes officers and it requires officers to de-escalate a situation. So if another officer is witnessing something, they have a duty to intervene, a duty to de-escalate, and only proportionate necessary force. So these were all really strongly advocated for by many of you who are here. We're really grateful for your advocacy and happy to answer any questions that you may have. I see so many questions in the chat, so I look forward to answering those shortly. Thank you so much for having us this evening.
Thank you so much, Delegate Shetty, and then Delegate Solomon.
Thank you, Shruti. And Linda and Michael, thank you for helping to organize and run tonight's event. Thank you all for being here. It's beautiful outside, maybe one of our few remaining lovely spring evenings before we're invaded by cicadas. So I'm so glad that you've all chosen to spend your evening with us. I'm going to try to touch on a couple of issues. I serve on the Appropriations Committee, so I am our delegation's budget guru, and Senator Waldstreicher touched on a little bit with the Relief Act, but I want to touch on a couple of other sort of big ticket, historic items. And I think as all of my colleagues have said, while we didn't get everything, I think that many of us had hoped to work on this year, the fact that we accomplished so much. I think, most folks would have said it would have been a coin flip at the very beginning of the year, whether the General Assembly even made it the full 90 days with the health crisis we were facing. So, it's a real testament to, our leadership and the systems they put in place. And I think the fact that it was so open and transparent and many of you were able to participate was just incredible. And I want to thank particularly our local partners, our council colleagues, folks in the nonprofit community, see some brothers and sisters from labor. I think this year in particular has just shown how collaborative a community we really have. And I think we've been able to do some really amazing things to help folks who needed it get through what's been a really difficult year. So as I mentioned, I serve on the Appropriations Committee, and this was actually my first full year as vice chair of the Education and Economic Development Committee. And so the two pieces of legislation, that I wanted to highlight that were really, again, transformative. We overrode the governor's veto of the blueprint for Maryland's future, or the Kirwan Commission, as some of you may know, that he vetoed in 2020. But because of the situation that we're facing, it wasn't just enough to override his veto. We actually passed sort of a Kirwan 2.0, a blueprint 2.0 that addresses a lot of the shortfalls and issues that we know kids are going to be facing as they come back to the classroom and as we move to return to normalcy. And so we were able to override the governor's veto, put in really, hundreds of millions of dollars into education supports for things, like mental health resources to close the digital divide, to address, learning loss, and really fully implement the blueprint and the commission's vision for, what we hope will be one of the best school systems in the world. Able to compete over the next decade, including a massive expansion of preschool and pre-K. And that was historic. And by overriding the governor's veto on that bill, we were actually able to unlock the school construction money through a bill that we passed in 2020 called the Built to Learn Act. And the governor allowed that to become law, but the unleashing of that funding was contingent on the blueprint going forward. And so, we now have about $400 million that's going to be coming to Montgomery County in addition to the sort of normal flow of school construction dollars. It's over $2 billion is going to be going statewide, particularly to the larger jurisdictions, who really have just a huge backlog in facility needs. And with a match from the county, that means we're going to have about $800 billion in new money for school construction, which will go a long way to revitalizing our facilities. And that was outside of the regular budget, which, in and of itself, again, I think if we had been having this conversation a year ago, we were looking at what could have really been a cataclysmic situation. There were estimates of potentially a $2 to $3 billion shortfall in revenues in the state. And, while that's one thing to see the number on the page, what that means is massive across the board cuts to the programs that we all care about, that are near and dear to our hearts, that, allow families to send their kids to high quality schools, childcare, to protect our environment and the Bay. And we got a glimpse of that really in July, before we had a sense of, again, what our budget year was going to look like. The Board of Public Works, at the behest of the governor, went through and made really deep cuts to a lot of really important programs. The university system took a $200 million cut. And through, really strong fiscal stewardship from the General Assembly and, a great partnership from our friends in Washington and our federal delegation, we were really able to turn that around. And, we were again able to make investments in places that I think we had only dreamed of at the beginning of session. We fully funded our community colleges and our higher education system. We fully funded healthcare. We actually completely restored the rainy day fund, which we had tapped for, COVID relief. We fixed our structural deficit, which means, for the next couple of years, we will be able to continue these types of investments. We provided huge supports for people with disabilities and their families. And we put a lot of money into capital, which is really important to make sure that we have the investments in the infrastructure across our state, to really see ourselves through the pandemic, and to pull a phrase from our new president, build back better. And that includes, we were able to bring about $125 million back to Montgomery County in capital grants. A huge chunk of that came to District 18, that we're really excited about. And I know Senator Waldstreicher touched on the Relief Act, and I did just want to highlight again and thank many of you on the call tonight for your advocacy on behalf of our undocumented friends and neighbors. What we did in the Relief Act, we became only the third state in the country to allow undocumented families to qualify for the Earned Income Tax Credit, which is even more substantial than the surplus or the subsidy payments and the assistance that went out through the Relief Act. And I know Jerry had put a question in the chat. It is for 3 years, and we hope to make it permanent. But that would not have happened without the advocacy of so many of you on this call, and so many folks across the state who really gave us the strength to be able to push back on the governor, and make sure that he knew that if he wanted the relief assistance, it couldn't be at the expense of so many folks who have been, frankly, on the front lines and hardest hit by the pandemic. So that was incredible, to see that get through, and really, I think, shows the strength of our community and our willingness to fight. On a personal note, our office and my team was incredibly successful this year. We, like Delegate Chetty said, tried to sort of limit the number of bills that we put in, and we were able to get 7 bills through the finish line in one form or another. And we even got one bill that we got passed in the 2020 session that was vetoed. We got that overridden, bill that I'm really excited about, to expand MARC rail service into Virginia and into the state of Delaware. We've been doing a lot of work with MDOT and MTA to actually get that implemented. And there are a couple of bills that I just want to highlight, in particular, that I'm really excited about. And fingers crossed will hopefully be signed into law, as Delegate Chetty said, shortly. The first is a bill called the School Clean Drinking Water Act. And, this was the 3rd year that we introduced it. We've gotten a couple of pieces passed here or there. But what this bill will do is lower the level of safe, not that there really is a safe level, but to the lowest levels we can get of lead in school drinking water. It's something that we worked closely with our partners in the county on. Montgomery County put this in place in 2019, the first year that we introduced it statewide, and we were able to get it through, which will go a long way again to protecting our most vulnerable and most valuable assets, our children. Another bill that I'm really pleased about was 3 years again in the making, called the Strength and Bargaining Act. We worked really closely with our state bargaining unit, AFSCME, to ensure that our employees at our state university systems get the rights and protections that they deserve. And in particular, we saw a lot of workers this past year with COVID really put in terribly vulnerable positions. We saw, policies that were incomplete and different from school to school. And this is really the first major change to the collective bargaining statute that governs our university system in almost 30 years. And it'll streamline the process. So we think it will save money in the long run as well, but really most importantly, level the playing field and make sure that our state employees are able to bargain for health and safety, that they're able to have a seat at the table appropriately. And so, that the values that our university system teaches to our students and espouses are actually put in practice with its workforce. And then the last bill that I want to touch on is called the Growing Family Child Care Act. Some of you may know we've spent a lot of time working to try to protect the childcare community during COVID and really make sure that they get the support they need. Because while childcare is obviously critical to development of our children, it's also really important to the economy of our state. It doesn't matter what income you've got, if you don't have a safe place for your kids and a high quality place for your children to be when you go to work, you can't work. And particularly women, have just been so hard hit during the pandemic because they're the primary caregivers. And when childcare is closed or can't operate because they don't have the support during a pandemic, it impacts everybody. And so, we worked long and hard and put a lot of pressure on the governor. He finally announced a $60 million fund in February after we put in a bill that provides relief payments to providers who've been really hard hit. Kudos again to our council members. Montgomery County was a real leader on this last summer. And then the bill that I mentioned that we got passed will actually build on a program that started in Montgomery County that will really help grow the family childcare community. It provides support, classes, and real pathway and partnerships for individuals who are interested in opening family childcare, which we know predominantly serves people of color, often serves immigrant communities. And not only is it beneficial to the community, but it provides really family sustaining wages and allows people to start small businesses. And so the bill that we passed will seed about $1 million over 2 years to allow a couple of different counties across the state. We're starting it as a pilot to begin to grow their family childcare businesses and community and really start refreshing the childcare community again that's been really hard hit during the pandemic. So my focus on the Appropriations Committee this year was really how can we get college more affordable? How can we get more students into a pathway to be able to access those kind of benefits and those kind of jobs? And really strengthen the economy in the state. So just really grateful to be here and looking forward to taking all your questions.
Thank you, Delegate Solomon. Thank you to all our D18 delegation for sharing the work that you have done in this 2021 General Assembly session. We will start with questions. I know that some questions were put in the chat and some of our delegation members have been responding to that, including also Councilmember Friedson. But I will begin asking questions that were submitted ahead of time. And then if other questions are there, please feel free to put it in the chat. And we will also make sure we address the ones that have already been responded to, just so that everybody knows what they are. So the first question, I believe, may have come in the chat already, is from Jerry Kickinson, who mentioned, did the police reform bill as passed meet your expectations? And the second one is, why did the Trust Act, despite being sponsored by the committee chair, not get a vote in the Senate Judicial Proceedings Committee? Only some of its provisions got into dignity, not detention.
Well, I can make a run at that. Thank you, Jerry, for the question. Great question. Like many of you, the District 18 team watched in horror when we saw the murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis. And we knew that it would require us to act. And we knew that we were in the midst of a racial reckoning. And we knew that we had to meet the moment. In my view, and like Delegate Shetty said, we did. We passed, without a doubt, one of the strongest police reform packages in the United States. And as Delegate Shetty mentioned, here's what we did. We repealed the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights. We enhanced police accountability by establishing civilian oversight. We required all law enforcement agencies across Maryland to utilize body cameras. We demilitarized the police. We severely restricted the use of no-knock warrants. We returned local control of the Baltimore City Police Department back to the people of Baltimore City. And finally, we passed sweeping use of force legislation. Delegate Shetty mentioned this. What it does is it criminalizes any officer who uses excessive force, fails to intervene when witnessing excessive force, fails to report excessive force, or fails to provide life-saving medical aid. I think we took the opportunity that was in front of us to pass a once-in-a-generation reform that really reestablishes trust and accountability in our police. As everyone here knows, our system of democracy only works when people have trust in the systems that govern them. And for many people, policing is the part of government that they interact with most frequently, unfortunately. And so we really had to get this right. There is more work to be done, no question. Absolutely no question, more work to be done. But I think we passed a package that we could be proud of.
Would any of the other delegation members like to jump in on this, or we can move to the next question? All right, so our next question is perhaps Delegate Shetty might like to take this one. Is from Hector Rodriguez. Help single mothers get help with housing and the youth with college funds. I'm not sure what exactly the question is, but that's the topic that's mentioned in the what was submitted.
So I'll speak to a little bit to some of the housing bills that we considered that would have broadly assisted many who are facing really challenging situation, particularly in the coming months, in the event that our eviction moratorium is rolled back. We considered a couple of bills, including just cause eviction, which would have required landlords to provide notice to tenants if they are being evicted on the reason for which that is occurring. We passed it through the Montgomery County delegation with a pretty strong vote. However, it did not advance in the General Assembly beyond that. There were a couple of other housing bills that were considered that would have provided additional relief to tenants. Some passed the House, some passed the Senate. There were sort of like a mishmash of like things we were able to get accomplished. But one of the most critical ones that did pass both chambers, I believe, and Senator Walstrecker, please tell me if I'm wrong here, is the bill that provides legal assistance to tenants. Did that make it through both chambers? Yes. Okay. So that's a really big deal because most landlord-tenant cases, landlords have representation and tenants do not. And having representation can often mean saving someone's home. And so providing access to counsel is monumental for these tenants. And so so that's something that I think we can be really proud of having achieved. There's still so much we need to do next session when we return. I'm sure that there will be a flurry of housing bills yet again, and I hope that we're able to pass a strong package of tenant protections. As far as assisting folks with college affordability, I think was the other piece. I know that Delegate Solomon will have specific things to share about from the budget perspective, but I'll just put a plug in for those of you who may not already know, but all 4 of our offices do have scholarships that we offer, General Assembly scholarships. And I don't think any of our deadlines have passed. Maybe mine hasn't, but please, if you know of a family in District 18, and this is anybody is eligible regardless of citizenship status. If they happen to be attending a school in Maryland or a school outside of Maryland with a unique major, they're eligible for a scholarship through our offices. So please have them email us individually and they can apply for those. So I don't know, Delegate Solomon, if you'd like to add anything.
Yeah, thanks, Delegate Shetty. And Hector, thank you for the question. So there's a couple of things. I'll speak sort of broadly to begin with. You know, as I mentioned in the budget, we fully funded our community colleges. We fully funded a formula called the Selinger formula, or excuse me, the CADE formula, which actually funds financial assistance for students who go to private colleges within the state. We fully funded, you know, all of the amazing, frankly, the really wide-ranging scholarship programs that we have and grant programs that we have in Maryland for low-income families. We fully funded the university system. But then, you know, there were a lot of other areas. There were actually 3 pieces of legislation that I was able to get through. You know, and again, our committee is a little unique. Our appropriations committee actually oversees not only the budget for higher education in the university system, but we also set the policy as well. So it's a good intersection on the subcommittee where I'm the vice chair. And so we had 3 bills that I sponsored this year. One is sort of a dramatic overhaul of how we hope high schools and school systems across the state will really work on the FAFSA, which is the application that you have to fill out to get access to federal aid, but it's also the same application that allows you to get access to Maryland state aid. And we have an application for undocumented families called the MISFA if you don't have a social security number. And there's a lot of changes that have happened at the federal level, frankly, that have really are going to streamline that process going forward. And we want to make sure that every student in the state understands how that process works. And frankly, we have students who are leaving millions, if not billions of dollars on the table of aid that they're entitled to, of free grants that would make college almost free for many of them. We want to make sure that students understand how to do that. We also put a provision in that bill to, make our social service organizations really think more strategically. So if you have an organization, a family that qualifies for food assistance or a family that qualifies for housing vouchers, it's more than likely that you would also qualify for a Pell Grant, or the state aid. And we want to make sure that at every point, not just at your school, you're getting information on how to apply for aid, and you understand what's getting what is available to you, because we know a lot of students who would do great in higher education may not go because they don't think it's affordable. And when they see, oh wow, I have community college for free, and I have all of this money that I can access immediately to go to University of Maryland or Frostburg, they're going to start that process. And so it's really critical, and I'm excited as we implement that bill. Another bill that we passed would really improve the transfer process between community college and four-year. We know a lot of students, particularly first-generation college students, start at community college. It's a little closer to home. It's often more intimate. And for a lot of students, it's a great way to save money. You go to community college, you get your gen eds out of the way, then you can transfer to the university system. And we have heard so many horror stories of students who took classes at community colleges, often, no joke, with the same professor who then teaches at the four-year institution within our system, and those credits don't transfer for one reason or another. And so the bill that we passed this year, I worked with Senator Elfrith on it, would improve that process and improve communication. It's a first start. We have a lot of other work to do with the university system. And then the last bill that we got basically wholly included in the budget, and maybe a little wonky, but again, makes a huge difference and really works hand in glove with the changes that we put in with the blueprint in the Kerwin Commission to encourage students to start taking IB and AP programs. We have no uniform policy on what you actually get credit for if you take AP or you take an IB class. And that means, if you go to Montgomery College, a 3 in an English, an AP English class may qualify you for full credit. If you go to Carroll County Community College or you go to Frostburg, you may need a 4. Or if you go to Bowie State, a 3 may qualify. And there's really no rhyme or reason when you look at, a side-by-side comparison of why one school does it and one doesn't. And so we are now requiring the Maryland Higher Education Commission to convene all the stakeholders throughout higher ed in the state and come up with a uniform policy so that students know exactly what they're going to get credit for. And again, we know that if you take an advanced placement course, or a college level class when you're in high school and you get some sort of credit, that is one of the best predictors of actually going to college and being successful in college. And again, we want to make sure that the pathway for students to complete their higher education is as quick and easy and affordable as possible. And so, something as simple as just a uniform policy that is incredibly clear to students going into these programs will really help on that. So, there's a lot of policy stuff that we can do that we're exploring that doesn't necessarily cost money, but if we can improve the process and improve the transparency, it can make things a lot more affordable and a lot easier.
Thank you so much. Moving on to the next question, we have one from Roger Padam, who has asked, I'm interested in what your strategy is for getting climate change legislation passed next year and how we can move Jared's bill on P3 through the legislation. So I will give this to Jared.
Thanks, Shruti. And Roger, thank you for the question. And I know I saw you on there somewhere in one of these little boxes. Thank you for your activism. I'll address the P3 piece first off, and I know Senator Waldstreicher led off with it. Today's announcement on the Beltway is absolutely huge, especially for our community. We still have work to do. The plan is ill-conceived and ill-fated, for the components that are still under consideration, which is the American Legion Bridge up the Beltway to 270 and the spur all the way up to 370. So we still have a lot of work to do, to rein that in. But at least for our district, where our line starts, it's a huge win that's been pulled out of the environmental impact statement. And for the foreseeable future, probably for at least the next decade, this will be off the table. And hopefully by that point, that idea will be consigned to the history books. So the bill that Roger references really would not have directly impacted this piece of the project. It's about improving the public-private partnership law that we have on the books, that was really written specifically for the Purple Line. We got further this year, frankly, than we had in the past. Literally, it died on the last day in the Senate Budget and Tax Committee. But we had a really great partner in Senator Rosapep, who represents the College Park area, who cross-filed the bill. Once again, it got out of the House. I think, so first off, I will say I'm planning on bringing it back next year because regardless of this project, we want to make sure the pieces in there about transparency and fiscal accountability and responsibility and good governance. I think once this project either proceeds one way in one shape or form or another, or is, collapses under its own weight through a variety of different ways, it's possible the federal government the new administration may revoke the NEPA process because it was done so poorly, without any impact from or control from the state. I think, by this point next year, that project will be a little bit different. And this will be more about just the problems in P3 law that we have. Because I think there was a misconception among some of the folks in the Senate that this is more of an intra-Montgomery County fight of, some folks up county want the roads widened, and those of us down county don't want, homes being taken. And that's not really the case. And this bill, again, would impact the potential for a P3 to build, a third span on the Chesapeake Bay Bridge, or, if we wanted to do some crazy hyperloop with Elon Musk. And it's again ensuring that public goods and public assets are protected and really preserved for public use. So I'm excited to bring that bill back next year. And I think, sometimes these take a couple of years, but I think next year we'll get it across the finish line. And on the environmental front, I think you're right. That's probably one of the big disappointments that the Climate Solutions Now Act didn't get through. Parts of it were added into other bills, which was really critical at the last minute. The 5 million trees, the electrification of the state bus fleet is really important. So I think I think I can speak safely for the four of us. It's going to be one of our big priorities next year, and probably one of the top priorities in the General Assembly of issues that we didn't get across the finish line this year. And it was disappointing because I think there was a compromise that would have gotten us further down the road to protecting the state from climate change. Even if it wasn't everything, it would have gotten us to a place where we could have come back in a couple of years and really fought for the rest of it. So disappointing, but I think we'll live to fight another day.
Thank you, Jared. The next comment is from Carmen Vincent. It's on my issues of greatest concern are jobs/fairness and reopening economy, and second, climate crisis. So I can pass that on to Delegate Carr. Would you like to try to answer any of that?
Sure, I'll give it a shot. I'll start with the second part of it, which is the climate crisis. As Delegate Solomon mentioned, we did not pass the big climate bill this year, but we did take many smaller steps to address parts of the climate with, issues besides electrification and planting more trees. We did a lot of things towards climate resiliency when it comes to flooding issues or protecting our community through resiliency. But we have more to do, I think, on transportation, on land use, on incentivizing renewable energy, wind and solar. We did make some progress on cleaning up our sources of energy by eliminating some dirty energy that had been considered to be renewable, but really truly was not. So we did make progress on that front, and we are going to continue pushing hard on that. And as I think Senator Waldstreicher had spoken about earlier in the Relief Act, which was a very significant piece of legislation that I think did do quite a bit for the recovery and helping people to weather the economic storm from the pandemic. There you have it.
All right. Our next question is one that is also in the chat. It's Stephanie Joseph who mentions she is very disappointed that juvenile justice reform and merit for public defenders didn't pass in the Senate. And I believe related to that, I saw something from Beth in the chat. She mentioned, why was the Juvenile Justice Reform Act killed in JPR? It represented 2 years of work of the Juvenile Justice Reform Council and had passed the House. So since it's related to the Senate, can I give it to you, Senator Wallstreicher?
Of course, yes. Thank you, Shruti, and thank you, Stephanie, for the question. First, on the Maryland Defenders Union, I don't know if people can see Stephanie, but Stephanie's got a wonderful Ask Me Council 3 and Maryland Defenders Union background. The public defenders in Maryland are attempting to organize. And I was honored to be at the beginning, at the formation of this wonderful and important fight that we have ahead of us, and proud to support Ask Me 3 and the Maryland Public Defenders, and Stephanie, you as a public defender in the fight to organize and unionize the Maryland Public Defenders. It's the right thing to do. Our public defenders do yeoman's work, have an incredible caseload to carry in our courts, which are now reopening fully and starting to move cases very expeditiously through the process. It's unfair to our public defenders and more importantly, unfair to our defendants to have public defenders who can't spend the necessary time with each defendant and provide the defense that constitutionally every defendant is entitled to have. So Stephanie, thank you for your work. And thank you to Pat Moran and Lance Kilpatrick of Ask Me 3 and all the public defenders who are organizing to make this happen. You have my full support. Stephanie also asked about the Juvenile Justice Reform Council. I am 100% supportive of the Juvenile Justice Reform Council legislation. It didn't die. What happened was we ran out of time at the end to move the bill through because the bill likely would have been filibustered. And so what we needed to do was to extend the commission for another year, while at the same time providing funding in that same bill for violence interruption. As many of you know, the ROCA organization, which is a wonderful organization stopping gun violence and violence generally in Baltimore City, their funding was tied up with this commission. And so we were able to extend the commission, pass the funding, and we'll return next year to pass the bill. And Stephanie, just as I support the Defenders Union, you have my word that I will vote to pass the Juvenile Justice Reform Council legislation. It's a very important bill, and I feel badly that we ran out of time this year. It was a difficult session because of COVID restrictions. So thank you for the question. It's a good one.
And Shruti, I just wanted to jump in real quick on the collective bargaining piece. Stephanie, thank you for all your hard work. Our committee, the Appropriations Committee, handles collective bargaining policy in the House, and I can assure you that will be a top priority. I serve on the Personnel Committee on Appropriations. That'll be a top priority for us again. We got a lot of great stuff through on collective bargaining this year. I mentioned my bill on the university system. We also got collective bargaining for community college employees across the state. And I think we did a lot of work this year to sort of shift the focus. I think there's always this pushback of, collective bargaining is going to mean huge new costs. It's not always about salary. It's about working conditions. It's about fairness. It's about a seat at the table. We still have a lot more work to do, but I just wanted Stephanie, to assure you it's going to be a top priority for our committee again, get it out of the House quickly and give you enough time to push it in the Senate.
Thank you. Delegate Shetty, would you like to answer this question about the status of bill to require tracking chain of custody of waste, specially used synthetic turf fields that are currently just dumped in our state's land and waters? Feel free to pass it on if you need to.
I think that this might be maybe Delegate Solomon. Is this your bill or?
So it's not. It's Delegate Lehman's bill, but she and I are working closely on the synthetic turf issue that I know is really important to a lot of you. Actually, I know Delegate Lehman and I are in the process of swapping calendar dates to brainstorm actually for next session. I had a bill that many of us I think have worked on, and I think Delegate Carr and Senator Wallstreicher worked on it when he was in the House to outright ban the use of state funding on synthetic turf. Sheldon, I know I saw you somewhere on there. There you are. And I know Diana Conway submitted a question on this as well. We didn't put that bill in this year because we just had a lot of other things going on with the pandemic, but we are working right now with the Appropriations Committee staff and with the Department of Legislative Services to try to get sort of a full inventory of all of the actual state funding that has gone towards it. And we think we may be able to get some traction and movement on, essentially promoting grass. We have some really amazing turf growers in the state, literally who supply grass for some of the top fields and facilities around the world in professional sports. And we should be funding fields and farmers in the state instead of giving our money to massive corporations that are destroying the environment. So I'm going to be working with Delegate Lehman to help whatever way I can. I think the bill got caught up in the Environment and Transportation Committee this year, but she's making progress. We're making progress on the issue, and hopefully we'll be able to be successful next year.
Thank you. I think I'll take the next question for Al Carr. It is in the chat and has to do. It is from Roger Patton, who said, I have become very interested in your work on the Government Operations Committee. In particular, I'm interested in your work trying to bring to light HOC's and WSSC's plans to development WSSC's site on Laytonsville Road. Could you say something about your work on this issue? What harms might the county suffer from the secret manner in which these agencies have been pursuing this development? What can be done to ensure a greater openness?
Sure. Well, thank you, Roger, for the great question. So that's been a focus of mine actually for the past couple years, is to improve the governance of our housing agency. We have HOC, which is started out as a federally funded housing agency administering these federal programs, has really grown. They are a governmental agency. They're independent of the county and the state, but they're one of the largest landowners, one of the largest developers, and a lot of their income comes not from the federal government, but just from rental income. And I've been very concerned about the need for strengthening their governance. So I actually introduced a series of bills, got one passed last year, one passed this year, to bring them into line with so many other governmental agencies that are either streaming their meetings or being more transparent with their spending, complying better with the Open Meetings Act, etc. And so, yeah, there is a land deal that's been in the works between HOC and WSSC and EYA surrounding the Laytonsville future station of the Purple Line, and where the WSSC depot there would be redeveloped into housing, and then there would be a land swap with an HOC property that HOC acquired nearby. And I've been paying attention to that issue. I do have some concerns about some potential conflicts of interest in the way that HOC has conducts their business. So I will be watching closely.
Thank you, Delegate Carr. Next question for you, Jared. As MTA approaches the hiring of a new contractor and the resumption of work on the Purple Line, what might be done to encourage the contractor to begin working on finishing the Talbot Avenue Bridge before school starts, and work on the bridge will it be restricted? What can be done to pass a comprehensive climate bill?
Thanks, Shruti. And before I answer the question, I want to just commend Delegate Carr and Delegate Chetty, particularly in the work on HOC. There were some really great local bills, and sometimes HOC can be a really opaque, tough organization to deal with, and both Delegate Carr and Delegate Chetty through our delegation have just done really incredible work on it. Some things that might make your eyes glaze over, but are really, really, really important. I think, Roger, that was from you, the question on the Purple Line. And I know a number of us were disappointed. I guess last week, the Purple Line now had a forum with Secretary Slater and the folks from Purple Line, and They shared that several of the projects that we had pushed on and that they had really committed to us to try to continue to work on are going to ultimately have to wait until a new build design firm comes on. As I'm sure most of you know, there was a huge falling out and catastrophe with the previous contractor. And so work on a number of the projects and really the whole line were halted for a while. The MTA and Purple Line Partners have begun work on some of them, but they don't have the capacity because they were all sort of subcontracted out to do them on their own. And so there's sort of two really important connections in our community, the Sleaford Road Tunnel and obviously the Talbot Avenue Bridge, both of which we heard from MTA last week are going to, again, have to wait until they have a new build design firm on. So I know just last week or the beginning of this week, I don't know, the days sort of blend together. We worked with Councilman Friedson's office to send a letter to MTA about the Sleaford Road Bridge or the Sleaford Road Tunnel. We are working on a similar letter with our other council partners. Talbot Avenue Bridge falls in Councilmember Hucker's district. On the Talbot Avenue Bridge, we did that walkthrough with the MTA team last year. I mean, unfortunately, Roger, the problem really is, we can push on MTA as much as possible, but, and I think Matt Pollack, who is now overseeing the project for MTA, has been really transparent. It's just a matter of, they want to make sure, thankfully, that they get it right with this new build design firm. So what they told us was they've now narrowed it down to three bidders. They're going back to get some more information from them and hope to have them selected by the fall. So it looks like we are going to have to wait. We're going to do everything we can, and hopefully, maybe they could get a subcontractor in, to do some of the work. But I think the bulk of the really complex stuff on the new bridge is probably going to have to wait, until they get the new firm on board, which stinks. And there's no way around it. I think we're all disappointed in the way that MDOT and MTA, and frankly the governor, who made the Purple Line, one of his big signature projects, has really failed on it. Again, I think that highlights why we need more oversight and better better accountability on P3 projects, because we don't want to repeat of the Purple Line, but we are all committed to making sure that it gets built. And I think Greg Slater and his team have really have done a good job with making lemonade out of a really terrible set of lemons.
Thank you. Delegate Carr, can you comment on the status of MDOT's fines and license revocation when folks get behind on paying tolls?
Sure, yeah. So this issue, I think arose first out of my work with Senator Waldstreicher. We were the House and Senate chairs of the Joint Committee on Federal Relations, and one summer a couple years ago, we had a whole briefing on this issue of what happens when you have tolls and fines and fees for transportation, and then you cross a state line. What can happen to you? And it turns out it was not a good story. So we were successful last year in addressing that issue as it relates to speed cameras and red light cameras. And I've also been trying to address the issue where it comes to tolls, where people drive on the ICC and they can very quickly rack up $1,000 in not so much tolls, but actually the late fees that get added onto the tolls for the cashless toll roads. So with the House did, for a second year in a row, the House did pass a bill to remove the ability of MDTA to suspend your driver's license. But that bill did not advance in the Senate JPR committee this year. We did, all four of us in District 18, we did recently sign on to a letter to MDTA, to the governor and the Board of Public Works also on toll debt, trying to push this agency towards consumer-friendly practices. Looking at great models, they have, like Massachusetts, the New England states have really done a great job of finding consumer-friendly ways to collect all the tolls that are due. And Maryland, unfortunately, is looking south towards Georgia. I don't think we should follow Georgia in their voting laws or also in their toll road policies. So all of us signed on to that letter encouraging best practices for toll roads. Thanks for the great question.
Let me just add Delegate Carr and Delegate Carr has been an incredible champion on this, but this also relates to what we were talking about reimagining policing. because when you charge people fees that they can't pay and then suspend their license, they have two options. They can not go to work, which for many people, of course, is their only source of income. For most people, is their only source of income. Or they can drive on a suspended license and risk a police interaction. That's not a choice we want people to make, and it's not a choice people should make. Criminalizing poverty makes no sense as policy, and it makes no sense as we try to limit interactions with police. And so, so we've got to pass this bill for so many reasons, but reimagining police is one of the most important reasons to pass this bill as well.
Thank you. Delegate Shetty, can you speak to some of the voting expansion work that you've done in this session?
Sure. I'll speak to some of the work that the General Assembly did, just especially since I think many of us since November in particular have seen some major restrictions enacted in other states that have gone in the complete opposite direction of where we should be going, right? To expand access to the ballot box. So you've seen how the news in Florida and other states that are starting to enact these like draconian rules around prohibiting people from giving water to people in the lines. I mean, this is just like unbelievable to me. So in Maryland, we are doing the opposite. We are trying to make it easier for people to vote. Many of us voted by mail, maybe for the first time this last cycle, because I think some of us are precinct officials and we volunteer on election day, so we vote at the polls or we vote during early voting, and so we've not had the opportunity in the past to take advantage of mail-in voting. But we did do some work to make sure that we're able to expand access to that. We're able to ensure that those who are eligible to vote but are behind the walls, so they're still incarcerated but eligible to vote, that they have access to their ballots. So we did a lot of work to make sure that those who are eligible to vote are able to do so, which I just think, even listening to the floor debates during these, I mean, it was like, at some point I remember there was a question of a floor leader asked by a Republican from Anne Arundel County. And he was asking these questions around voter fraud, and the floor leader was like, "Are you talking about in Maryland?" And he said, "Well, that's not relevant." Like, as though we weren't debating legislation that was going to be specific to Maryland voters. And so I think we shouldn't forget that as wonderfully democratic as this community is, and as progressive as we are on legislation like this, is not the case across the state. And so we can't take anything for granted, and these types of bills to expand access to the ballot to those who are eligible are really, really important. So I'm really proud of the work that we did, even in this strange session, as it were.
Thank you, Delegate Shetty. Delegate Solomon, can you talk about MARC and Transit Safety Investment Act?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Trudy, and thank you for your activism in leading the Montgomery County chapter of the Sierra Club. So obviously access to public transit is a huge issue for our district. I think we've got 5 metro stations in our district, 2 or 3 MARC stations if you count Silver Spring, which is close enough. And obviously it's a huge issue statewide in access to jobs and access to affordable housing. And so, we know public transit's been really hard hit, because of COVID. But I think we took a lot of steps this session to make sure that our system is able to recover when things return to normal, and that we're in a really good position to expand and really take advantage of what I think is probably, the most pro-rail president I think that we've ever had, who most folks know as Amtrak Joe, which I love that. And so we did a couple of things. Shruti mentioned the Transit Safety and Investment Act, which really, to steal a line from our great friend in Bethesda, Delegate Mark Corman, it's really sort of the Eat Your Vegetables bill. So there was an inventory done a couple of years ago to see sort of what we needed to get our state transit system run by MTA essentially to run at where it's supposed to be, the state of good repair. And what that report showed was we needed $2 billion in investments just to make sure that the service we have in place now actually functions the way it's supposed to. So that means if you're waiting for the MARC train at Kensington, the train actually shows up on time. Or if you're taking the bus to or from school or work in Baltimore City, that the bus actually shows up, and your train doesn't break down on the tracks, or your light rail doesn't break down. And so we passed that this year. It was an incredible coalition, really of groups that you wouldn't think, the faith community, the civil rights community, because transit and access to transit is an issue that impacts so much more than just, can I get to work? And so we passed that bill this year, which will just, again, be a historic investment in getting the system to where it needs to function properly over the next 5 years. And then we passed a couple of bills really that look at expanding the system. I mentioned my bill that we overrode the governor's veto on, that will really start the process for run-through service of MARC and hopefully VRE into Maryland and Virginia. Into Northern Virginia, connecting all of the amazing opportunities that are going to be coming to the region because of Amazon, closes the gap between Delaware and Perryville in the northern part of the state. We had a really great roundtable last week with business leaders and elected officials across the region. We had the mayor of Newark on and his team, Newark, Delaware. And we were talking about all the incredible opportunities that students at the University of Delaware could take advantage of if we had service that connected Delaware to DC and to Baltimore. Students who would consider living in this region instead of going back to the Philadelphia area because they could get back and forth. Not to mention all the folks that live in Harford County or who live in Delaware who commute to jobs in the Baltimore region. And, it's just incredible to think about the opportunities of having a whole new, universe of college students who want to make Maryland and the DC region their home. And so that's really incredible. And then we passed two other bills, one that begins the process of expanding MARC rail into Hagerstown and further out in Western Maryland, and another bill to begin the process of implementing and really starting to hopefully at some point build, if we're able to get federal money, a light rail system in Southern Maryland. So through Charles County and connecting that whole region, into the metro line, and what we're seeing is a real, frankly, great enthusiasm from MDOT now around improving MARC's system. We're hoping that there's going to be a big announcement on the B&P tunnel, which is second only really to the tunnels under the Hudson River into New York City, are the biggest bottlenecks for rail in the Northeast Corridor. And there's been a lot of talk about maglev, which is a whole boondoggle for another time. But what's incredible is if you actually implement the upgrades to the B&P tunnel, which Amtrak and the federal government really want to make, and we think MDOT is now going to be pursuing, you could get the time for a train from Baltimore's Penn Station to Union Station down to 30 minutes on an express train, which would be incredible. And so we have a system, frankly, we don't need to build a brand new shiny object with a maglev that would disadvantage communities of color in Prince George's and Anne Arundel. If we put a little shine on the MARC system that we have now, it could really be incredible. So I think we're poised. We have really great partners in Virginia who made billions of dollars of investments in their rail system and public transit over the past couple of years. And I think, with a new governor who's truly, really committed to this, I think we can really make great strides. And so, building off of the dedicated rail funding that we got for Metro and making sure that we're able to solve our affordable housing crisis and our traffic issues through public transit. Thanks for the question, Trudy.
Thank you, Jared. That detailed response and information was so very helpful. And of course, we really appreciate all the work and amazing work you all have done. I know there were many questions in the chat, some on multiple questions on the same topic. So I've been trying to cover all of them. I have one last question for Delegate Alcar. And then if you want to make closing comments, that would be great. I do have some more information to share from the Montgomery County Democratic Party before we wrap up. So Delegate Carr, can you please speak to the level of priority you anticipate next session toward closing the digital divide, especially enhancing broadband to serve minority, rural, and other underserved communities?
Thank you, Shruti. Thank you for the question. So the General Assembly did pass 2 bills on the topic of broadband that I think will help to lay the foundation for improvements going into the future. On the for next session, a bill that I'm having drafted addresses the problem of tenants. People who live in apartment buildings often do not have a choice when it comes to the wired broadband providers. Their landlord has cut a deal with one of the companies, so there's a monopoly arrangement inside that building, and in exchange for a kickback, the tenants who live in that building do not have a choice. So if they run into problems with their broadband provider, they can't switch to a different one, or they can't, negotiate and get a promotional deal, things like that. So Anne Arundel County actually has solved this problem. They have a great law in place that basically requires their landlords, as a condition of being able to rent, have a rental license, they have to be, their buildings have to be open to all the wired broadband providers. So I'm drafting a bill that would bring that exact same model to Montgomery County to address that problem. We all know how critical broadband is. The pandemic really revealed that it's broadband is like water, it's electricity, it's a necessity for many, many people, as opposed to just something that people want.
Thank you so much. I know we are running out of time. There is a question that I have received from Tony. I think he's put it in multiple times and has requested that if, I'm trying to read the question now. Hold on, give me 1 second. I think it was related to civilian oversight boards. He said it's for Senator Wallstreicher. Senator Wallstreicher, do you want to make any comments on this or follow up offline?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on, Shruti, where we are in the program. I'm happy to talk about civilian oversight if you want to take it offline, whatever. I don't know when we, what your schedule is. So whatever is easiest for you, Shruti.
Maybe if we can just take 2 minutes to respond to the issue itself.
Sure. So it's critical that we integrate civilian oversight into our police reform. That was an important call from the Black Lives Matter movement, and just an obvious policy change. Police should not be able to police themselves. We need civilian oversight over the police. As many of you know, the LEOBR replacement was the Speaker's Bill. Adrienne Jones is a historic figure in Maryland. She is the first African-American to serve as Speaker, the first woman to serve as Speaker, and her bill was the police disciplinary bill that eventually passed. And I was proud to stand up on the Senate floor and speak on its behalf, and in fact was asked by the Senate president to kind of give the closing argument on behalf of the Speaker's bill and in support of civilian oversight of our police. The way the Speaker's bill does it is integrate civilian oversight into every process of the police disciplinary process. And so there are kind of multiple steps within police discipline. There's a oversight board, there's a charging board, and there's a trial board. At each step of the way, civilians dominate that process. Police should not be able to police themselves. So I'm proud of the Speaker's bill. I was proud to vote for it. I was proud that we overrode the veto, and I was proud to speak on its behalf.
Thank you so much. If there are other questions, and I know I'm sorry we tried to cover everything, but if we missed anything, and if you have further questions or need more insights, please email directly members of the delegation, and they can put their emails in the chat if you don't already have those. So on behalf of the Montgomery County Democratic Party, first I want to thank all our elected officials who joined us today. I know from MCDCC and District 18, MCDCC member Erwin Rose joined us late, so I just wanted to acknowledge that. And with that, one of the announcements that I wanted to make is that the Montgomery County Democratic Party is getting ready for a listening tour and door-to-door knocking when it is safe. We need to make sure that every precinct has a precinct chair and a vice chair and a robust volunteer team to help us connect with voters in every district. There are 33 precincts in District 18, some of which have vacancies, but we are also trying to create a robust team of volunteers because the 2022 election is really important for us. In 2020, the Montgomery County Democratic Party recruited and mobilized over 400 volunteers for the poll watching program. And we need to make sure we continue with the same enthusiasm and energy to make sure we can elect a Democratic governor and Democrats to our state and county. We have some precinct leaders from this amazing D18 team on this call. And for those of you who are not precinct leaders, I just want to mention that the precinct leaders are neighborhood volunteers. They are appointed by the Democratic Party to be the conduit between the party and the voters. They represent a single designated polling location for the area they live in. And they have a very important role in helping the Democratic Party organize activities. So please consider volunteering if you are not already volunteering. And if you are, thank you very much. Please invite a friend to join you and recommend someone that you know so that we can continue to make this team stronger. It's a great way to connect with your community. You don't need any prior experience. We will provide training and materials and help you during the process. We have been organizing training and orientation sessions to help people get more familiar with the role and how they can volunteer with the Democratic Party. So feel free to reach out if you have more questions and if you want to learn about those opportunities. So with that, I have dropped some information in the chat. Feel free to sign up if you're interested in volunteering or email me if you have any questions. Once again, thank you very much to all our delegation and elected officials for joining this session today. And I do want to pass this on back to Linda Foley, the chair of MCDCC, since she is still on the call, to see if she has any closing remarks to share.
The only closing remark I have for everybody is if you're not vaccinated, please get vaccinated so that we can really open up and really start to get back to the life that the great life that we have here in Montgomery County. Thank you everybody for coming. Thank you, Shruti, for your moderation. Great job. Thank you to the delegation for all the hard work that you did in Annapolis. And for everybody else, thank you for joining us tonight. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thanks.
Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Hey, everyone. Great job.
Good work.
And everyone.